everyone, Carl Bimage here, welcoming you back to INC Live and for a unique version of the UFC post-fight recap show. Unique because for the first time since 2018, this weekend's Fight Night served as the season finale for the 29th season of The Ultimate Fighter. Headlining the card though was a match the purists were going to savour. Edson Barboza took on the featherweight division's rising star Giga Chikadze in a match that promised plenty of action and a lot of sore legs. Let's get to the fights. And we start off with our main event where Giga Chikadze claimed what is arguably the biggest win of his MMA career so far, beating Edson Barboza in the third round, and in doing so setting himself up potentially for a match with somebody within the top 5 at featherweight. Giga's always been sort of the MMA fans' best kept secret. Like, he didn't really have the highest profile name, but when you looked at the guy's kickboxing record, when you looked at some of the performances he was having in the UFC, admittedly against lower level competition, you did see a guy where you thought, if he can just get himself an opportunity and he can just start stringing it together, the UFC might be onto something. And then of course recently we've had the Cub Swanson win, first round with the Giga kick, and then of course victory over Barboza. Now I think he's number 10 in the weight class. He's almost certainly going to move to, I think, number 8, number 7, something like that. And then you're putting him against the Yair Rodriguez's, the Calvin Cates of the world. And if he gets through those, who knows where he could go from then. And I think it's impressive to think about. When you think that the guy's 33, he's not a spring chicken. He just feels like it in regards to the context of modern MMA. And I think he is a good testimony for me of how important fighter mileage is rather than actual age. Because the age between Barboza and Chikadze was only something like 2 years, 3 years, something like that. But Giga looked the fresher fighter. I was interested to see though early on that we've seen plenty of times the way to beat Edson Barboza, to get him on the back foot, to close the distance so he can't throw those kicks. And yet Giga took almost the opposite approach. He was inviting Edson into a striking match. He was happy to stay on the outside, use his movement, and at times he was frustrating Barboza. Like, Barboza would get a little bit irked that Giga wasn't throwing, charge in, and Giga was just countering him all the time. And I think near the end of that first round, he did land that body kick on the liver. It did stun Barboza a bit, and that's when Giga started moving forward, putting on a lot of the pressure. First round, very easily, in my opinion, for Giga. What I did like that Edson did, however, was he did adjust things. He started targeting the body a lot more. He realized, hey, this guy is a much fresher fighter. He's moving a lot. What better way to try and neutralize that movement than going for the legs, going for the body, trying to slow him down a little bit. So I think you can make the argument Barboza won the second round. Personally, that's how I felt. And then we saw the same sort of situation happen as in the first round in the third. Giga again targeting the body, and then eventually that accumulation of strikes took its toll on Barboza. It was a very clinical, mature performance, and I think a real star-making performance as well. It's simply because of the name value that someone like Edson Barboza has. To beat Edson Barboza in his own game, which is essentially a kickboxing match, takes a lot of skill. I bet there was, though, a lot of bookmakers who were petrified when Giga went for that Darce choke, because what would the odds have been for Giga to win that fight by submission? It must have been something like, 10, 20 to 1, something like that. So I bet they're glad that he eventually gave up on it and just went for the ground and pound. I did like as well from Giga that, without wanting to sound too... If this comes across as offensive, then maybe I apologise. But I think a lot of fighters from Eastern Europe, they're going to struggle trying to market themselves to a primarily American audience because of the language barrier, because of the different cultural elements. Even Khabib for a long time didn't really embrace that. And then he realized, hey, I need to play the media game myself. And he started to do the whole stuff with like this is number one bullshit and Irish 5 million, Russia 300 million, all that sort of stuff. He realized there is a media side to this game. And I think Giga has taken some of that on board. I especially liked his post-fight interview because we'd seen Max Holloway and all of his boasts about being the best boxer in the UFC. So for him to go out to Max Holloway and say, hey, you know what? You might be the best boxer in the UFC, but I'm the best striker. I want you next, and saying, hey, if you do need someone to fight Volkanovski, if Brian Ortega pulls out, I'll jump in there. I know a lot of people don't like this sort of very media savvy game, say it is a bit desperate, but the UFC love that. Like, the UFC have always had issues when it comes to trying to build stars. They get very lazy and expect the fighters to do it for themselves. Giga has done that for them by talking up a big fight, and of course he's backing it up with his performances in the cage. I think I read somewhere that he actually lost on the Contender series. He actually got submitted by, I think it was Austin Springer. He got submitted by. And despite that, he made it into the UFC anyway. And he's been on absolute fire. I think he's got the most wins of any fighter, which came from the Contender series, which I think is very impressive considering he lost his first. He's on the Contender series. He lost to Austin Springer by submission. It's one of only 2 losses that he's had in his career. And yet, look where he is now. I think it's a real good story to have, and I think he's going to be a real addition to that sort of top 5, top 6 of the rankings. As much as I do like Edson Barboza, and as much as I have been impressed by this move to featherweight, because personally I thought this guy is absolutely shredded at lightweight. There's no way he's going to be able to get down. I thought we were going to have a situation where he was going to deplete himself too much and be easy prey. He's done a lot better at featherweight than I thought he was going to. But at the same time, I think we've seen Edson Barboza's ceiling. He's always going to be that sort of guy around sort of 7th or 8th in the rankings. He can trouble some of the guys in the top 5. He can serve almost as a gatekeeper to anybody wanting to try and enter the top 5. But I think we've seen as good as Edson Barboza's going to get. I don't know how good Giga's going to be. And when you look at the other guys from that region who are coming through, when you look at, say, the Merab Dvalishvilis of the world, I mentioned this a couple of months ago, Georgia has become a real powerhouse in mixed martial arts over the past couple of years. And Giga is now the figurehead of that. It's very fascinating to see. I'm intrigued to see the next step. I think him versus Calvin Cater would make a lot of sense. He's ticking a lot of the right boxes to be a guy to look out for over the next 2 or 3 years. Now, I have to admit, I didn't watch any of the Ultimate Fighter this year, which, hands up, I have to apologize for. When you do follow an MMA channel, you should try and watch as much MMA as you could. Obviously, I live in the UK, so it's very hard for us to get tough in this country. With that being said, though, I saw that there were 3 Ultimate Fighter finale fights taking place on the card, and on the whole, those matches were very, very good. Like, I think especially that bantamweight bout, Tercios and Hestand. Split decision, I think the judges went with the right call. Tercios did himself the world of good with that post-fight interview. If you remember Britton Hart, the girl who beat Paige Van Zandt at BKFC, she gave a very similar sort of speech. Bit surreal, bit strange, but very passionate. You could see that passion and what it meant to him shining through, which I think is something that I think people are going to resonate with. With that being said, though, my big concern is how relevant is TUF in 2021? Like, if you go back and you watch those sort of early TUF seasons, a big part of the reason why they worked, not only were they novel for the time, which you're never going to get 29 seasons later when you follow pretty much the same format for the past decade and a half and so, but also as well, the reality TV boom was massive. You had Survivor, Big Brother, The Amazing Race. People had an appetite for that type of programming in a way they don't now. And when you've got the Contender series, which is doing pretty much what TUF did in a much more fan-friendly format, I just think how relevant, how important is TUF to the modern day UFC. Like, Kamaru Usman was a TUF winner. I think he won season 21, I think, something like that. And nobody ever brings that up when they talk about his portfolio. Because I just don't think the boost that comes from winning TUF is as high as what it was. And you look at some of those later winners, like outside of Usman, Suarez, and to a lesser extent Macy Chasson, there hasn't really been anyone who got that bump, that boost from winning TUF. Now, whether Ricky Tercios and Brian Battle are going to change that remains to be seen. From the consensus I got, this season of TUF was actually very good. I think a lot of people liked a lot of the fights which took place. I just don't really think it resonates. It works as well to a modern day MMA audience. In terms of the fights though, perfectly serviceable. I enjoyed them. Petrovsky got himself a win, ground and pound up against Michael Gilmore, and then of course Brian Battle beating Gilbert Urbina. For the rest of the card, I think the big story for a lot of people is Kevin Lee. Now, it's always been a bit of a meme to say, hey, Kevin Lee, future UFC champion. I hear Brian Campbell. It's one of his recurring jokes to bring up future UFC champion Kevin Lee. But when you look at the guy, you can easily see why. He trains with Firas Zahabi. He's got the physique. He's got the build. I think his striking is solid. His wrestling is fantastic. And in the first round of a fight, Kevin Lee can be pretty much unstoppable. But you take him out that first round, and the shortcomings start to come through. I don't think his striking defense is all that great. And you just wait for that moment for it all to click. And it should click. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's a mental thing. I don't know if it's confidence. I don't know if it's conditioning. It just seems to fall apart. Daniel Rodriguez is a fairly solid fighter. I wouldn't say I think he's above average. He's not one of those guys who just fills up numbers. I don't see him, but at the same time, I don't think he's going to make the top 15. He's a guy who, in theory, Kevin Lee should be beating fairly comfortably. And credit to Rodriguez, great striker. He pieced him apart in those final 2 rounds. He actually wobbled Kevin Lee near the end of the second. We saw the chicken legs in the same way we did when he fought Barboza. It's so frustrating to see, considering how good and how much potential Kevin Lee did have. Another thing I will say as well is that Kevin's always jumped between lightweight and welterweight. He looked tiny in there against a guy who's had no problems making 170 through most of his career. And yet Kevin Lee looked very small, so he needs to sort out which weight class he wants to commit his future to, because as things stand right now, this sort of limbo position isn't doing him any good. I didn't, though, like what Dana White said, when Dana White was trying to imply that Kevin Lee may potentially have a future away from the UFC. One of Kevin Lee's losses is against Charles Oliveira, the lightweight champion of the world right now. And the fact the UFC are considering cutting him, and yet keeping around Sam Alvey, who hasn't won his past 7 fights. By the way, Sam Alvey, awful performance against Wellington Turman. I mean, I don't have any ill will against Sam Alvey from a personal level, but I do think he's past his sell-by date in the UFC. And the fact the UFC keep giving him chance after chance, I think it doesn't sit well with me. As a guy, lovely. As a fighter, question marks. But for Kevin Lee to be considered to be cut, I think it would be incredibly disappointing if the UFC choose to go down that road. But we've seen what they did with Jimmy Rivera. We've seen what they've done with Damian Maia, JDS, Overeem. They will cut anybody if they think they are damaged goods. So I do worry for Kevin Lee, because there is a decent fighter still there. I could very easily see him going to Bellator or the PFL and finding success. At a UFC level, at an elite MMA level, he just needs to put it together, and it's frustrating he hasn't been able to. In terms of the rest of the card, I think there were good wins as well. Abdul Al-Hassan continuing this sort of one-shot knockout head kick. Because, of course, we had Joaquin Buckley beat Imber Kasanganay, one of the greatest knockouts of all time. And then he gets head kicked by Alessio Di Chirico. And then Chirico one-shotted by Al-Hassan. So you know Al-Hassan's going to get head kicked for his next fight. But 17 seconds. Spectacular finish. A lot of people say this. If you get Al-Hassan in the first round, he can be one of the most dangerous fighters in the middleweight division. You get him out of that door, then the issues start to come to the fore. But for those first 5 minutes, as dangerous as they come. Big standout for me in terms of the rest of the card, though, I am going to give a shout out to Gerald Meerschaert. Great comeback win. He was the biggest underdog on the card and beat Mahmoud Muradov, rear naked choke. And this was... I didn't really have any real sort of personal opinion towards Gerald Meerschaert going into this fight. I mean, he'd been around for countless years. He's had about like 200, 300 fights. Obviously, people remember him for the Chimaev loss, which I think is going to be a real sort of blemish next to his name. He's going to be that guy. But he faced a lot of adversity in that first round and still powered through to get the win. I was I got really invested in that fight. I was rooting for Gerald to make that comeback, and to see him do so, a guy of his age, a guy who's been around the block plenty of times, to get a real sort of statement finish. I don't know if he got a performance bonus. I'll have to check that out. He certainly deserves one for the comeback, though. Great win for Gerald Meerschaert on what was, in my opinion, a fairly solid card. Can I say it's one of the greatest fight nights of all time? No. Was I entertained? Yes. Star power, though, as it has been for a lot of these fight cards, did suffer. And it would be something that I'd like to see the UFC maybe try and find a solution to once we do open it up back to the crowds at some point. And that is all the time that we have for the UFC Fight Night recap. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, post a comment, do anything to try and help the algorithm. These videos don't really do all that well when it comes to YouTube, so any sort of support that you can give will be greatly appreciated. I've been spending most of my time working on the latest INC video. Stay tuned to the main channel, It's Not Cagefighting, for any sort of updates regarding that. I'm going to be back next week, and thankfully for us Brits, this one's on at a normal time for once. Derek Brunson takes on Darren Till. Can Darren end his recent poor run of form? Can Derek Brunson make a claim for a UFC middleweight title shot? This is the INC. Thank you for watching.